The following video shows you step by step how to install the new FCS II system. Before beginning the install process, ensure the following equipment is easily accessed: the router jig, FCS fin plugs, router with recommended 2-flute cutting bit, and FCS II dummy fins. The cant angle for each plug is critical for correct fin placement. Pay attention to the colour printed onto the plug for the best results. 0-degree plugs have no print. Yellow indicates 3 degrees, grey indicates 5 degrees, and orange indicates 9 degrees. For centre plugs, ensure the C is present on the plug. The orientation letters, arrows, and print are all sounded off after the installation. For correct fin placement of thrusters, follow these points. The cant angle is built into the plug. It is recommended that you use the FCS II dummy fins when setting the cant angles. For rail plugs, ensure the arrows are pointing towards the rail. Always ensure the barrel is at the rear of the plug. Failure to do so will result in backward fins. For quads, the rear plugs must be either 3 or 5 degree plugs. Centre plugs cannot be used for quad rear fins. There are a number of steps before you make the cut. Warning: turn off the power to the router before setting the depth. Invert the router and place the FCS II router jig over the cutter. Then place an FCS II plug onto the router jig. Adjust the depth of the cutter to a line between 0.5 and 1 mm above the flange of the top of the FCS II plug. If not already marked by the shaper, mark the shaper's dots as usual to determine fin placement. Draw a line that extends 5 inches towards the nose of the board. Align the crosshairs indicated on the jig with the rear shaper's dot and the top of the line. It's critical that the shaper's dot is aligned to the correct crosshair indicated on the router jig. Failure to do so will result in incorrect fin placement. With the jig in place, it's now time to make the cavities for the FCS II plugs. Turn on the router away from the board and jig. Place the straight edge of the router shoe onto the jig. Once the router is flat on the jig, use one hand to control the router and the other hand to secure the jig in place. In smooth, even strokes, remove the foam from the centre of the cavity. Once the perimeter is cut, remove any excess foam from the centre. Check the plug is sitting between 0.5 and 1 mm below the surface of the foam. If too shallow, reset the cutter depth and make another cut. If too deep, it's still possible to float the plug to the correct depth when setting the plugs. When doing a stringer cut, turn on the router and carefully lower into the foam to the right of the stringer. Move the cutter to the top of the stringer towards the nose of the board and slowly cut through the stringer from right to left. Once cut through, move the cutter back through the stringer cut and down the right-hand side, cutting only the foam. Slowly cut through the bottom of the stringer from right to left. With the cutter now on the left of the stringer, make several passes down the stringer, planing it until only a thin vertical wall remains. Cut the complete perimeter of the cavity. Once the perimeter is cut, turn off the router, wait for it to completely stop and remove it from the cavity. Break out the remaining thin piece of stringer. Place the router back into the cavity and remove the final piece of foam. Insert an FCS II dummy fin into the plug and insert the plug into the cavity to check the depth before removing the jig from its position. The cavity is now prepared to insert an FCS II plug. Before setting the plugs, ensure the following equipment is easily accessed: FCS II dummy fins, pair of scissors, resin mixing container, MEKP catalyst for polyester resin, brushes, 2-part polyester resin or epoxy resin, gloves, resin mixing sticks, and Cabasol or FCS powder. Place the FCS II plugs on the board in the correct orientation to avoid confusion during install. Secure the FCS II dummy fins to the FCS II plugs before installation. Do not install the system without using the dummy fins, as it may result in incorrect fin angles and orientation. Mix approximately 8 ml of resin per cavity into a container. The addition of Cabosil will thicken the resin and allow for more control over the flow of any excess spillage during the installation and significantly increase the strength of the system. Pour or brush approximately 8 ml into each cavity, and then with your brush ensure that the walls of each cavity are sufficiently covered with resin. Holding the plug by the dummy fin, use a brush to apply a thin layer of resin onto the sidewalls and base of the FCS II plugs. Repeat this process for each cavity. With the cavity and FCS II plug now wet out, place the plug into the cavity. Continue to push the plug into the cavity until resin flows over the top of the plug. Remove any excess resin with a brush or a squeegee. For epoxy resin systems, remember to mix a slurry of resin and FCS II glass powder. This will reduce the chance of outgassing. Check the cant, toe angles, and depth of the plug is correct. Adjust accordingly and then tape down before the resin has gelled. Warning: ensure resin does not flow into the fin tab cavities. This will bond the dummy fins to the plug or cease the mechanism. We recommend allowing 12 hours to cure the resin before removing the tape and dummy fins. Once the resin has cured, carefully remove the dummy fins and place a green sticker over the fin tab cavities to seal them when glassing the board. Cut out football-shaped patches to be placed over each plug. The patches should extend 1 inch or 25 millimeters around the perimeter of the plug. A minimum of 1 4-ounce patch is recommended to effectively strengthen the fin area. Mix the resin and pour a small amount over each plug to allow the resin to saturate the 2 layers of cloth. Once the final passes have been made and the rails tucked to the deck, come back to the plugs and use a gloved finger or squeegee to work out any air bubbles. After hot coating, sand the board to the desired finish. For manufacturers who base the fin area to pre-sand the plugs, we recommend using a new sticker before the final hot coat. When sanding the plug, the sanding depth should remove the L, R and C letter without removing the FCS logo. If the logo no longer appears on the fin plug, the installation is too shallow. If the letters still appear on the plug, the installation is too deep. In both cases, the plug won't effectively hold the fin. To avoid this, ensure the installation depth is correct.